Welcome, everyone, to the second installment of our Child and Health in the 83rd Texas Legislature webinar series. And today, we're going to ask the question, should Texas consider a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages? Before we begin, I just want to tell everyone my name is Skeet Kaldur, and I'm the co-director of the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living, professor of epidemiology at the UT School of Public Health, and we're located here at the Austin Regional Campus in Austin, Texas. And we brought together a great panel of experts today to comment on sugar-sweetened beverages and taxation. But let me do a little bit of housekeeping before I jump in. First of all, today's webinar is going to be recorded, and it'll be archived, and it'll be made available on our website, which is www.msdcenter.org. I assume you might know where that is if you've found us this far, but msdcenter.org, Michael and Susan Dell Center.org. You can find that in a PDF of the presentation and slides. That'll be up tomorrow if you want to go back and look at it or forward it to your colleagues who couldn't be here today. During today's webinar, we're going to encourage all of you to ask questions via the chat box, which you can access through the control panel at the top of your screen. You can type in your questions at any time, but to keep us on schedule, we're going to hold off on the Q&A until later after we're done with the presentation portion. So type your question in now or hang on to them. In about 30 minutes, we'll get to the Q&A. Next, I'd like you to know just a little bit about the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. We're an international leader in conducting health research and providing programs that promote healthy living for children. We are very grateful to Michael and Susan Dell Family Foundation. They provided funding for our center. We're, as I said, located here in Austin, Texas. You can find out more about our center if you want to at our website, msdcenter.org. And since you're obviously here and you're interested in health policy, I recommend that you check out the tab at the front page of our center called Healthy Living in the 83rd Texas Legislature. We have a bill tracking tool. If you're here from Texas, you might want to find out what's going on. If you're from outside Texas, have a peek at what we're up to. This is the legislative season in Texas. We do it every 2 years for 6 months, and we're in the middle of it. In fact, tomorrow is the last day to file new bills. We're going to talk about some bills later today. So now I'm delighted to introduce our two guest panelists today, Kelly Brownell and Roberta Friedman. Dr. Brownell, I'm just thrilled that he's here to talk to us today. He's the James Roland Engel Professor of Psychology at Yale University, where he also serves as Professor of Epidemiology and Public Health and is the Director of the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity. And he's got a long list of books and professional scientific papers. But in 2006, I like this one, Time Magazine listed Kelly Brownell as the world's 100 most influential people in its Special Time 100 issue featuring those, I quote, whose power, talent, and moral example is transforming the world. So Dr. Brownell has been working in this area of policy and nutrition for a number of years and has a very distinguished career and has worked with the Institute of Medicine and all sorts of big committees and reports. Roberta Friedman is also with us, and she works with Dr. Brownell and is the Director of Public Policy at the Rudd Center for Food Policy and Obesity at Yale University. And part of her job is to educate federal, state, and local policymakers and advocacy organizations about food policy and obesity research, and also to create resources to help them write and implement effective obesity prevention policies. So welcome, Kelly and Roberta. We're very pleased that you could join us at our virtual table, and thank you for coming. Next slide. Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Kelly and Roberta right now. They're going to talk to us about their perspectives relating to sugar-sweetened beverages and taxes. Then we'll come back and I'll talk a little bit about what's happening in Texas. We'll open it up for question and answer in about 25-30 minutes. Take it away, Kelly and Roberta.
All right. Thank you, Steve. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you and your colleagues for doing such good work at the Dell Center. You folks are doing groundbreaking work, and it's really nice of you to pull together this webinar. I'm also very happy to have my colleague Roberta Friedman to join us on this because she has vast experience working with people on the ground and in legislatures on taxes and other issues. So she has a lot of real-world grassroots experience that I think will be very helpful today. If we could go to the next slide. The reason that one of the things that I'd like to, now I'm not sure if I'm controlling the slides or not, Steve, you know? Okay, maybe I am.
Oh, you're, we're controlling, Kelly, from here. So
okay.
Just let us know.
So this slide shows our website at the Rudd Center, which you see circled down at the bottom of the page. The reason I show this is we have an awful lot of resources on food and food policy issues that people often find helpful, including things that Rob Friedman will talk about more in just a few minutes. But we also have an email newsletter that goes out monthly that alerts people to breaking developments on food policy issues, and also a wonderful series of podcasts that we recorded with visitors to the Rudd Center. If I may have the next slide. One of the issues, if you're dealing with the obesity or poor diet issue in general, that has to be addressed is why worry about sugar-sweetened beverages? Why single them out, or why begin with them? If I could have the next slide. The companies will claim that they're being picked on, that there are a lot of contributors to obesity, which of course is true. But the reason that sugar-sweetened beverages seem to stand out as a category and have become the target of a number of interventions around the country is that, first of all, people get it. People understand this category of foods and tend to perceive it as a category that has calories but no nutrition value. So it makes sense to people just from a common sense point of view. But there's also a lot of scientific evidence that would support working with sugar-sweetened beverages. Single greatest source of added sugar in the American diet, completely empty calories because of no nutrition. The third bullet point, poor calorie compensation, is an extremely interesting and I think important part of the picture. And so, because scientific studies show that people don't seem to recognize calories. The body or the brain doesn't seem to recognize calories very well when they get delivered in liquids. So if people are consuming excessive number of calories in solid foods, it could be pizza, donuts, or ice cream for that matter, the body seems to register those calories, at least to some extent, and then you might eat less later to make up for overdoing it at one point earlier. But when the calories are getting delivered in liquids like they are in sugar-sweetened beverages, then his body doesn't seem to do as well with those and doesn't seem to feel as full or to recognize the calories. There's a good bit of scientific evidence now on what sugar does to the brain, and it behaves once it gets into the brain, once it signals the brain, very much like classic substances of abuse like nicotine, alcohol, heroin, or morphine. That is, it activates the same brain reward pathways, sets up the same kind of cravings, withdrawal symptoms, and things like that. Now, nobody would argue that it's as strong of an addictive substance as those other classic substances of abuse, but it still does seem to be having at least some addictive effect. And this might explain why people keep coming back for more. There's the gratuitous addition of a known addictive substance, caffeine, that does, we know, create withdrawal and create cravings and the like. A lot of people have had experience with that. There's the targeted marketing that occurs with vulnerable populations. So in some ways, it's not surprising that the highest consumption is in the poorest parts of the population. And then in my mind, the scientific evidence linking sugar-sweetened beverage consumption to negative health outcomes, obesity and diabetes, is rock solid and is beyond dispute. There are contrary studies that don't show a relationship, but those tend to be funded by the industry itself. If I may have the next slide, please. Excuse me, the biologists have worked out, medical researchers have worked out the mechanisms that link consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages with a variety of metabolic dysregulations, and then in turn with the metabolic and disease endpoints that you see on the right-hand box there. Now, it can't be surprising that sugar-sweetened beverages do this. If people are drinking a lot of sugar water, you'd expect to have all these kind of consequences. So in some ways, you'd ask why you even need to show a figure like this, but in the event you're interested, all the mechanisms of this have been worked out in a variety of studies. The next slide, please. There are a vast number of efforts underway around the country meaning to address the issue of high sugar-sweetened beverage consumption. And we can go through just a few of these. Taxes is only one of the things that are being undertaken. So if Texas decides to get involved in taxes or other efforts to reduce SSB consumption, it'll have a lot of company because so many other states and cities are working on this. Just as an example, the mayors in several major cities have forbidden the sale of sugar-sweetened beverages on municipal properties. The rationale being, why should we be selling things on city properties that are contributing to disease? The same thing is happening with hospitals, kicking out the sugar-sweetened beverages in a number of places around the country. Schools were the first frontier where this happened, and schools all around the country are getting rid of the sugar-sweetened beverages. And as you may know, national legislation will kick in soon that will make that occur nationally. And so without going through each of these ovals here, you can just see that a lot is going on. The litigation has not yet occurred, so I probably should have put a question mark there, but I'd be pretty surprised if something doesn't pop into the scene before too long. And then, of course, the topic of today's discussion, the taxes, are a very interesting piece of the picture. May I have the next slide, please? So which policies make sense if you want to deal with the obesity problem? Well, one thing that can be very helpful is to do modeling of what the anticipated impacts would be of various policies. So let's say you improve nutrition in schools, or you restrict marketing, or raise the price of something like sugar-sweetened beverages. You'd like to know in advance which of these things will have the greatest impact, because then you know where to put your public policy priorities. And this paper, published by Steve Gortmaker and colleagues in a very highly regarded medical journal called The Lancet, helps address this. And they've distilled a lot of knowledge into a set of policy recommendations that is on the next slide, if I may have that. Now, without going through what all of this means, and you have a chance to go back and reflect on this if you wish, or you could go get the article itself. But they've done some very careful modeling on this. I think the group at Harvard that does this is about the best group in the world doing this type of work. And they've been very careful about this. And if you look at the number one thing on the list, it's a tax on unhealthy food and beverages. So what that means is that they estimate that given the cost, which is basically nothing, the impact is tremendously high. And so of all the things that you see listed here, they would put that at the very top. And the next slide shows the top 3 things distilled from that list. And as I said before, the unhealthy food and beverage tax is at the top of the list. If I may have the next slide, please. Now, one thing that has to be addressed if a state or a city wants to enact a tax is what the industry will say in response. And by now, there have been enough places that have considered the taxes that the industry response is a quite predictable script. And Rob, in her discussions, will talk about what some of the industry claims are. One of the things that the industry will often say is that we're agnostic about which product we sell. That is, we have various products in our portfolio, and if people switch from one to another, we're just as happy. So, for example, Coke and Pepsi own Aquafina and Dasani waters. And so if it were true that they were agnostic about which products they would be selling, then if people switch from Coke or from Pepsi to their version of water, they'd be just as happy. And in fact, you'd expect them to be even happier because they charge more for the water than they do for Coke and Pepsi in most cases. But in fact, I don't think that that's true, because people don't overconsume water. But they do overconsume Coke and Pepsi for those reasons, and other sugared beverages. I'm just using them as examples for the reasons we said before: the addictive properties of sugar, the addition of caffeine, the heavy marketing, and other things that go on. So I think the companies will have shown in the past that they'll fight vigorously against anything that would decrease the consumption of their flagship sugared beverages. If I might have the next slide, please. So with that in mind, I'll turn the floor over to my colleague, Roberta Friedman, who, as I said, is the Director of Public Policy at the Rudd Center, and she can talk about what's happening around the country.
Great, thanks Kelly, and hi everyone, very glad to be here today. This first slide is on our website. We have an extensive set of resources on our sugar-sweetened beverage pages, and you can find this one on it. It's a map of the states that have filed legislation in 2013. A couple of them are sales taxes, but the rest of them are excise taxes, and so you can see 11 other states have joined Texas. And you know, we're very pleased with what the strong response this year, and in the past years, we've been tracking them since about 2009, and many states are considering and reconsidering, and you know, we're certainly hoping one of these days one of them will pass. If I could have the next slide, please. So as Kelly mentioned, I wanted to go through some of the industry's defense, because we're seeing this not only when we sit in on public hearings about this and the beverage industry shows up. There's some certain things that they just keep saying all the time. And you'll see a couple of them are true, and we can poke holes in the rest of them. They are not true as far as we know and what the science says. They will say that many things drive obesity and that a tax won't solve obesity, and both of those are certainly true. It's a very complex problem, obesity, and we have to attack it from a lot of different angles, and the tax certainly won't solve obesity, and the public health community has never really said that. We're just saying it's one of the ways that we think would have a significant impact in helping bring down consumption. And they're saying that consumption is down, but obesity is up, so why are we targeting sugar-sweetened beverages? And I'm actually going to hold on that one because I'll show you a couple of slides in a minute that show you what the consumption trends are. Consumption is actually not down, but it is going up. They will always say that sugar isn't special, that all calories are equal, and you know, certainly all calories count, but as Kelly was saying, the liquid calories are much more conducive to weight gain than calories from solid food. And we're talking about nutritionless calories here. We're talking about calories that don't add anything of value to our diets. They'll also say it's about physical activity, and we see this as one of the industry's ways of really just blaming the victim. You know, if you're not working out hard enough, if you're not getting enough exercise, that's what the problem is. But and you know, certainly people need to exercise as much as they can, but there are some studies that are showing that the increased number of calories that are available in our food supply are really more than enough to explain the epidemic of obesity in this country. They'll say the science isn't clear, and Kelly talked about that already. We've got a lot of studies showing the association not only between obesity, but diabetes, heart disease, gout, dental caries. And since we've been tracking this since 2009, especially, we've been putting together synopses of all of these, of all of the studies that have come out linking these diseases with consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages, and you can find them all on the website as well with you know, full references. They will also say that people will lose jobs, and I've got a slide in a couple of minutes about that. Some researchers at the University of Illinois in Chicago did a study showing that they don't believe that that will be the case, that people will lose jobs. And we certainly haven't seen it with tobacco. Employment didn't go down after tobacco taxes were instituted. And the final thing, one of the final things the industry will say is that the taxes would hurt the poor. But you know, in terms of being regressive, these chronic diseases are disproportionately hurting the poor. They are regressive diseases. And if we were talking about beverages that were, you know, really necessary to our diets, really necessary to sustain life, like water is, then we think the industry might be able to make the claim, but otherwise not. Could I have the next slide, please? So as I was saying, the industry says that consumption is going down, but obesity is going up, and so we shouldn't be targeting sugar-sweetened beverages. But this first slide, as you can see, are soft drinks and fruit drinks, and in fact, consumption of those have gone down. But if you go to the next slide, you'll see that consumption of sports drinks, teas, the sweetened teas, energy drinks, and that should say actually enhanced or flavored waters, the water with sugar in it, consumption of those beverages have actually gone up. And so, you know, when the industry says consumption is going down, stop targeting us, they are not telling the entire, they're not showing the entire picture. Next slide, please. And this was just about the jobs loss research that I was talking about, and these are findings that are going to be released, we hope, in the summer. The state-level sugar-sweetened beverage taxes won't lead to job losses. This was in Illinois, and might lead to some job transfers from the beverage to the non-beverage sector, but overall not to job losses. If you'll go to the next slide. So I wanted to point out a few more responses from the industry. They are saying we're part of the solution, and I don't know if you have seen this, but CocaCola just released a 2-minute video that they call Coming Together, where they literally say we're part of the obesity solution. And you know, a lot of the message in it is that it's your fault if you're drinking too many. It's your fault if you're overweight, because we're doing what we can. And we're seeing them spending a lot of money, not only on lobbying, but on what they're calling philanthropy and funding physical activity programs and funding community gardens and things like that. And they're really trying to position themselves as part of the solution as opposed to being really a part of the problem. And I'm going to show you a slide on the front groups and on the lobbying. So if we can go to the next. But before I get there, you know, when they say they're part of the solution, this is a brand new product. It's called Kickstart, and it's meant to be drunk at breakfast. It's got 4.5 teaspoons of sugar in it, and it's about 5% juice, but it's called an energizing fruit punch. And they're selling it as part of, you know, so it's basically soda for breakfast. So the more they come out with these kinds of products, the more public health people say, are you really part of the solution? It doesn't seem like they're helping much. Next slide, please. So I mentioned front groups, and this is an example of them. This is Americans Against Food Taxes. They've also created some of these similar front groups. They just created one called Richmond Against Food Taxes, because in Richmond, California, there was just an initiative, a sugar-sweetened beverage tax initiative on the ballot, and the beverage industry came in with $2.5 million and set up Richmond Against Food Taxes and hired people from the community to fight them. And the thing about this is that, you know, if you find this on the web and you click About Us and you see the membership, they will say that this is a coalition of concerned citizens. But in fact, it's really a front group for the companies that are associated with the production and the distribution and the promotion of food and beverage products. And in fact, we, Kelly and one of his grad students wrote a paper on this that you can find on our website, and just did a short study taking a look at the membership and showing that the majority really are not concerned citizens, but they are beverage industry and related people. If you'll go to the next slide. So I had mentioned lobbying, and I thought this was a very interesting one to put in, because you can see that, you know, they go along 20–30%, but in 2009, the beverage industry spent close to $72 million lobbying in Congress, and it happened to coincide with when they were considering, very briefly considering, a penny per ounce tax on sugar-sweetened beverages in order to fund the American Health Care Act. So, you know, they're in there and they're spending their money, not only in Congress, but, you know, as I said, in small places like Richmond, California. And they've got deep pockets, obviously, and they fight as hard as they can. Next slide, please. So I wanted to just show you this and ask the question and have you think about it. You know, are SSBs the new tobacco? And I put in some of these different aspects of tobacco and sugar-sweetened beverages, and I think that we can make a pretty strong case for sugar-sweetened beverages being a public health menace, certainly unnecessary for survival. We've got a lot of data that show they are heavily marketed to children and adults. They're contributing to the diseases that are driving up healthcare costs. The industry is certainly looking for young consumers. They want to get them brand loyal very early, and they're doing their best to do that. Both products are price elastic, and as Kelly was talking about, you know, we are seeing now more and more evidence that sugar is probably addictive, just as in tobacco, nicotine was addictive. So I go to the next slide, please, and I think we're going back to Kelly. Yeah.
Hey, I'm sorry, it took me a little bit to get off mute. All right, so in conclusion, and Rob did an excellent job of talking about the industry's defense. And if Texas gets serious about considering a tax, then these are the arguments that will be coming to a theater near you because they've been predictably rolled out in other places. And one point I'd like to emphasize is that the industry will has shown in the past that they'll go into communities and give contributions to ethnic and community organizations. And then, you know, what appears to happen is that then they expect the organizations to come out against the tax. And so the tobacco industry had a long history of doing this, especially with African American groups. And the sugar beverage industry appears to be doing the same thing, except they've expanded beyond the African American groups into the Latino community. So in conclusion, if you're going to start addressing the obesity problem, there are a lot of things you could do. You could work on physical activity, you could work on diet, and within each of those, there are lots of opportunities to do things that would be helpful. But on the food front, we think that sugar-sweetened beverages are a logical place to start for the reasons we mentioned before. We believe there's a strong scientific base for considering taxes, given how much consumption is expected to change if a tax was implemented and what that would do to healthcare costs. The taxes are becoming normative in the U.S. and outside the U.S. because more and more legislative bodies are considering them, and they now exist in a number of other countries. And as we said, the industry response is predictable. So we'll end there, and I'll be happy to interact with the group in any way that's beneficial.
Great. Well, thank you, you two. If you've just joined us, we're talking to Dr. Kelly Brownell and Roberta Friedman about sugar-sweetened beverages, and this is the Michael and Susan Dell Center for Healthy Living. And on our website, msdcenter.org, you can see some of these materials and slides and pick them up for your own afterwards. I'm just going to talk a little bit about the proposals that have happened here in Texas. My name is Skeet Kaldur, if you joined us in the last couple minutes. So last legislative session, 2011 in Texas, there were 4 bills and 1 joint resolution that was filed. And only one of the bills got heard by the Senate Committee and Finance Committee. It was introduced by Eddie Lucio Jr., Senate Bill 1004. And that ultimately was left pending in committee. And, you know, the reason why we're here, and we'll talk about this in just a minute, the reason why we're here today is that there's 3 new bills, and I wanted to get the reactions from Kelly and Roberta about them. But just about what happened last session. So you can see that folks who registered as being for and spoke for the increase in sugar-sweetened beverages tax were Center for Public Priorities, Texans Care for Children, Pediatric Society, Seton Family Hospitals, Texas Health Institute, Texas PTA, Parent Teachers Association, National Association of Social Workers, and the Texas chapter. I was there, and I presented evidence myself from the University of Texas about the pros and cons of taking such an action. Those who registered against were the Texas League of United Latin American Citizens, LULAC, and American Beverage Association, Texas, Hispanic Women's Network of Texas, National Hispanic Professional Organization, North American Theater Owners, and Texas Vendors Association. I suppose we could pause for just a minute about, you know, comparing the for and the against in light of what Dr. Brownell just said about funding of local organizations from either the Beverage Association or the large distributors and producers themselves. So one of the things that was interesting that was mentioned in the testimony, the questions that Eddie Lucio asked was, have you received funding from the American Beverage Association or from Coke, Pepsi, or some other soda producer? And many of the groups that list against said yes, they had. And the reason why this is just a little bit surprising is that, Senator Lucio is from the bottom of Texas, in the Brownsville area and along the Rio Grande Valley. So he is representing a significant portion of the Hispanic voters in Texas. And you'll see in just a moment that Joe Farias from San Antonio also represents a large segment of the Hispanic voters in Texas too. So Kelly and Roberta, can you comment just a little bit more about what your knowledge is of funding of local or national organizations of this type that I just talked about?
Well, as Roberta said, one of our graduate students went to work on this issue and found the groups in those that were listed for Americans Against Food Taxes, which is a euphemism. It should be called Soda Companies Against Soda Taxes. But what the organizations who were part of that group, whether they were receiving money from the industry or not, and similar to what your Representative Lucio found, a lot of the groups were getting money from the industry. Now, it would be interesting to also ask those groups if they were getting money from the industry before soda taxes became an issue. It's possible some of them were, but my guess is that many of them were not. And then the companies somehow persuade these groups that the taxes are regressive and would hurt people in their communities. But of course, the rampaging obesity and diabetes in those communities is just a terrible tragedy. And as Roberta said, soda is not necessary for health. So if people have to face a tax, it doesn't mean they have to keep buying soda. They could buy diet versions of things. They could buy 100% juices. They could buy milk. They could obviously get water, which is free. So there's no reason that it has to be a regressive tax. And depending on how government decides to use the revenue, if it's used in ways that disproportionately help people in poor communities, then that would offset any regressive argument that would exist anyway.
Yeah, we also heard about the regressive nature of that, but thanks for commenting. Brooks, next, why don't we get through this segment, and then we'll open up the conversation to others who are out there listening. One of the reasons I invited Kelly and Roberta to come join us today is that it feels to me that there might be a changing climate in Texas. Certainly in 2011, there were 4 bills filed, 1 got heard, as we just mentioned. A recent Texas Legislative Budget Board report from 2013, the Government Effectiveness and Efficiency Report, GEAR, issued a subsection within that report which pertained to sugar-sweetened beverages, and quote from these reports, reduce obesity by authorizing a consumption fee on sugar-sweetened beverages. So that's what they're talking about. They did a careful analysis in this report. It's on page 46, I believe. If you have access to it, you can open the link that's listed here. The Texas Medical Association estimated Texans spent $15.6 billion in 2011 for the costs associated with obesity, and these expenditures are projected to rise to nearly $40 billion in 2040. It's estimated that a tax on sugar-sweetened beverages would generate, I believe this is at the 1 cent per ounce level, $642 million in fiscal year 2014, and over $1 billion in 2015. So that was interesting that the Legislative Budget Board would put out a report that essentially outlines the same arguments that we've heard here by Kelly and Roberta. I looked up who are the current board members of the Texas Legislative Board, and the joint chair, the joint chairs of it, there's 2, is the Lieutenant Governor, David Dewhurst, and the other joint chair, Speaker of the House of Representatives, Joe Strauss. There's a number of other high-ranking Texas elected officials. Jim Pitts, the House Committee on Appropriations, Tommy Williams, the Senate Finance Committee, Harvey Hildebrand, House Committee of Ways and Means, and then several state senators that have been elected. We've got Dan Branch, Sylvester Turner, Judith Zaffarini, Juan Hinojosa, and Robert Duncan. I took this as a sign that there might be a change in the climate in Texas, that people of this stature in this state have put out a report that talks about a lot about the pros of going ahead and doing this, or at least thinking hard about it, the fiscal realities and the same points that you're talking about, Kelly and Roberta. Have you seen in other states such of a budget board report, and do you think that this carries weight from your purview across the country?
This is Roberta. I am trying to think if I have, and I don't recall any of these kinds of reports. Kelly, is anything coming to mind for you?
You know, I have a big recollection of at least one state where but I don't remember which one it was, where a legislative budget body like this came out in favor of a tax. And I'll try to, Steve, I'll try to get the information together and get it to you, but I just don't remember which state it happens to be. But this does strike me as a significant advance because it shows that it would be in the financial best interest of the state to do something like this. Very powerful argument.
Yeah, I'm trying to gauge the importance. This feels, down here, it feels kind of important. If you go to the next slide, please. Okay, here we're talking about what's what has been filed in 2013. I guess there's one more day left here in Texas to do so. I don't know if we'll see anything new. We've got 3 bills, one by Senator Eddie Lucio, again. It's been referred to Finance and referred to Subcommittee on Fiscal Matters. In that bill, he's talking about a penny per ounce tax on sugary drinks, including powders, syrups, and used to make sugary drinks. And we've got Representative Joe Farias has sponsored 2 bills, similar bills, but they're talking about different types of taxes or a different level of taxation. So the first one, HB 779, imposes a tax on 1 cent per ounce on all sugar-sweetened beverages. What's different about this one than Senator Lucio's is that it dedicates the revenue to the promotion of children's health programs. And then House Bill 735 is the same, except it has a 5 cents for every 12 ounces. Next, please. Just a little bit more detail about Senator Lucio's bill. It covers all sugar-sweetened beverages and sugar-sweetened beverage precursors. It's an excise tax, which is reflected in the shelf price, which is different than a sales tax. It's adjusted annually for inflation based on the Consumer Price Index, and the revenue from the tax goes into the General Revenue Fund. Kelly and Roberta, can you comment about some of the features of this bill and how you think it's in step, maybe, or what the pros and cons are of it?
Well, this bill seems to have the relevant things that you'd want in a bill. So I congratulate the legislator here for thinking of these things. Why have an excise tax? Well, the problem with a sales tax, Steve, as you mentioned, is that you don't see the price increase until you get to the cash register at the point where most consumers aren't paying attention. So if the tax goes earlier in the chain, then it's reflected in the shelf price, which helps. The other problem with the sales tax is that it's a percentage of what people pay for the overall price of the product. And if people buy large containers, like a 2-liter bottle, for example, the amount they're paying per ounce is quite low, and hence the tax they would pay is quite low. And last thing you want is an incentive to get people to buy larger containers. Another issue that is relevant here is how much do you need to charge for a tax? Well, if you're thinking about just raising revenue, if that's the purpose, then it almost doesn't matter how much you charge because you're going to raise a lot of money, and the higher the tax, the more the money. But if the main purpose of a tax is to discourage consumption of the beverages, which is where the healthcare benefit would occur, then the tax has to be high enough to get people's attention, and that's where the penny per ounce comes from. If you get too much lower than that, people aren't going to notice the price shift very much, and it's unlikely it would affect consumption. But a penny per ounce seems to be a reasonable level, and that's what's being considered most around the country.
I've been trying to pay attention to this too. So one estimate that I read actually came from your center that a 10% increase in price, one might expect a nearly 8% reduction in consumption. I've also read the industry itself, the American Beverage Association put out a report, I believe, that says a 7% increase in price would also lead to a 7.8 reduction. So is it one of the arguments for this, having this tax, is its impact on reduction in consumption? Clearly, there's an impact on the state revenue, and that the reduction in consumption would then, theoretically or possibly, certainly would contribute to reduction in calories, which would be, aimed in the right direction of reductions in obesity in this country.
Yes, it's the reduction in calories that were the impetus for the tax in the first place. And also, here's one area where the industry gets caught in its own contradictions, where on one hand, the industry will say these taxes won't work because people will just find ways around it. And then on the other hand, they say that people will lose jobs in their business. So it's got to be one or the other. And the economic estimates are that the tax would have a significant impact on consumption, and that would drive down obesity. It wouldn't eliminate it by any means. It wouldn't even be close to eliminating it, but it would have a positive impact, enough where you see differences in healthcare costs.
Steve, if I could just say too, we've seen quite a number of studies being done, of surveys being done of the general public in different states saying, they ask basically, would you support a sugar-sweetened beverage tax? One just came out from California on this, and about 40% of the population said yes. And then they said, would you support a sugar-sweetened beverage tax if the revenue goes for childhood obesity prevention? And the approval of it went up to about 68%, and we're seeing that in a lot of different surveys in different states. So that's an important piece of it as well.
You guys say, in your estimation, then, that the public in general does support this, and in particular supports increase in taxes if it goes to assisting in the other ovals that were on the chart that Kelly showed us earlier?
Yeah, in particular, if it's the money is going to go for obesity prevention, that's when the approval goes up significantly.
Or even if the money is going to be used for some other cause that the public believes is important.
Yeah. Let's move to the next slide, please. So here we've got Joe Farias, and what he's talking about in Senate Bill 493 is revenue. One difference from the tax side is that revenue from the tax would go to a children's health promotion account, where 80% of the funds would go to the Texas Education Agency to do the following 4 things that you can read on your own related to school health. And then 20% would go to the Department of State Health Services for training and technical assistance for the implements and maintenance of coordinated school health programs. And from my perspective, I'm sitting here in the Dell Center for Healthy Living. We do a lot of work with schools, and have met with a number of school districts and principals and state officials. The last legislative session in Texas, we saw a significant drop in funding to schools, and as schools make their decisions about how to deal with a lower level of funding, oftentimes it's coordinated school health that gets what I've seen is the short end of the stick. So providing funding back to these agencies in physical education, nutrition education, from my perspective, would be a very nice outcome in addition to the reduction in consumption related to the tax in and of itself. Is this a common thing that you're seeing in other areas and states where this has been proposed, this designated fund?
Yeah, most of the bills that have been filed have some kind of dedicated fund, and as Kelly was saying, it's not necessarily to education or for coordinated school health, but some of them go to a general obesity prevention fund or some to children's obesity prevention. There are also some states that are interested in maintaining parks and other kinds of services that'll get people out and getting physical activity.
Yeah. So now let's move into a little bit of the, further discussion and answer. So for those of you who are with us and online and listening, we've got Kelly Brownell and Roberta Friedman from Yale and the Rudd Center, and myself, Steve Kelder from University of Texas School of Public Health and the Michael Susan Dell Center. Now is your time to type in questions, and we can see them and we can respond. I'll start us off a little bit. We've talked on, there's pros and cons to everything, of course. So we talked a lot about the pros of trying to do this, about how to accomplish it. Potential revenue amounts in a state like Texas could be, close to $1 billion, what we're talking about, that there's benefits to the public and public health with regard to lowered consumption, which potentially could translate into lower obesity, particularly if some of these funds are designated for health promotion programs. So you'd be working on two sides. On the downside, you've listed some objections by the industry. What about people that think that this is interfering with consumer freedom? When I talk about this, and I do occasionally, as I present this in different forums, I often get this question, but I want to hear what you guys have to say about that, consumer freedom.
Steve, when you mean you guys, you mean us or the general group?
No, I meant Kelly and Roberta, yeah.
Oh, okay. The Public Health 101 is that government often steps in to help out people when they need help. And so we accept a lot of public health things. We require parents to get their children immunized. We require cars to have airbags. We require speed limits on highways. We do a lot of things like that to help the public health. And it's just a matter of whether people think obesity and diabetes are serious enough problems where we want government to step in and act on our behalf. And everybody will have a different decision on that. They'll come to their own conclusions. But more and more people are saying, yes, government does need to be involved in this space because we're all paying really high healthcare costs. And so they begin thinking about things like taxes.
Right. Roberta, anything further on this point?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. I'm looking in the box. Do we have any questions from our crowd? While we're waiting for these folks to type in their questions, Kelly and Roberta, do you have any questions about Texas and what we're doing here?
I'll be interested to see what Roberta feels, but boy, it'd be very interesting if somebody could do a poll down there of what public opinion is, because then you'd find out if the industry gets in and starts doing its preemptive public relations to see what the public support would be for it, especially depending on how it was framed.
Well, I would love to do a public opinion poll. I just haven't found out a place to secure the funding, to be honest, because they're not free. That's for sure. I think this moment in time would be a very good time to do something like that here in Texas.
And Steve, have you got all of the same groups on board that you did in 2011 and more? Who's involved now in advocating the tax?
It's a little bit early, and I'm not, to be honest, I'm not that politically active with regard to these things. I come in and provide testimony as requested by the legislature, and maybe that'll happen again this year. But the usual cast of characters, to my understanding, in terms of public support of it, would center in the pediatric associations, family practice associations, and the public health groups too. But I have not cataloged them all just yet. That's a good question.
Thing that would also be helpful in advance is to work with the community groups that are likely to be the target of funding from the industry, to let them know preemptively that this funding will be coming down the road, but it has a vested interest behind it, and that they're going to be asked to do things that may not, in fact, be in the best interest of the community.
Yeah, I'll be curious once this rolls down and we get to the public testimony part for both Senator Lucio and Representative Farias's bills to listen to what they have to say. What I might do is to give a call into their staff and see what folks are commenting back to them, what they're hearing about it. One issue that's challenging sometimes for people to wrap their minds around is should the tax be imposed on diet sodas, low-calorie beverages? What's your case? What's your argument about that?
Well, this comes up 100% of the time, and it's a very thorny, tricky issue. There are two primary concerns with the diet beverages. One is whether the sweeteners are safe, and then the other is whether they really help people control their weight. And I would say the science on both of those issues is not terribly conclusive. Probably for the sweeteners that have been around a really long time, we know by now if there were negative health consequences. But some are newer on the market, and there just hasn't been enough experience to really know. But whether they help people control their weight is a whole different matter. So you could suggest taxing or having educational programs against the diet beverages as well if you want to embrace the precautionary principle that if there's any chance they're unsafe, you shouldn't be using them. But in fact, the research isn't clear enough for us to recommend a tax yet. So far we haven't suggested that that occur with diet beverages because we want to be on the strongest scientific ground possible.
Yeah, although I agree with you there, Kelly, absolutely, particularly with a public policy of this nature. Although I have read, I think there are two systematic reviews and meta-analyses which have linked the consumption of diet soda, artificially sweetened beverages, with conversion to type 2 diabetes. So that is leaning, that evidence, I believe, is accumulating.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Let me ask, there's a question from Casey Hansen, one of our listeners. How should we engage our partners, churches, schools, etc., in bringing this issue to the forefront? What have you seen and heard in other places?
Kelly, I can take this one on. I think what we need to start with is some education, and we've seen this across the country. There are different states and cities that have wanted to go right for a sugar-sweetened beverage tax and realized that they need to take a step back first and sort of soften the ground and get people to understand the nature of these beverages and how they're contributing to poor diets and to these different diseases that they're associated with. And, I think churches and schools and small arenas like that are the perfect places to take fact sheets and talk to people about the issue and explain some of the things that we talked about in terms of not being a regressive way to deal with reducing consumption, and just get the information out there. Because what I would like to see is more and more we start to talk about sugar-sweetened beverages and sodas and things like that as not food, because they're not. They just are not contributing anything to our diets.
Another thing that can be helpful is to see down the road before. So, for example, the city of Philadelphia came very close to passing the tax twice as large as what we're talking about. They came within one vote of the city council of possibly passing the tax. And part of the reason is that the city health department did a lot of work with community organizations. So groups like that would be very helpful to connect with in order to see how to build the strongest coalition of groups that would help in turn support the tax.
I'm sorry, I had the mic off. Just ask you a question. Another question that I hear sometimes, and I'd like your opinion on, is if the objective is to reduce obesity, why not tax fatty, salt, or other unhealthy foods that make up a larger portion of our diets? Hello? I think we may have experiencing some technical difficulty. I'm not hearing Kelly and Roberta. Are you guys still there?
Yes.
Good. We have a few more questions. One from Maria Funes. I don't know much about the topic, but you've made the comparison to tobacco. Do you think that beverage companies would be more prone to succumb to the tax idea rather than something more extreme, like a general surgeon warning on their products?
Well, my guess is that a lot of different things will be in order to help address the obesity problem. And even if you're looking at just sugar beverages, you want to be doing more than taxes. So some people have proposed warning labels, some graphic ones and things like that. I suspect everything will have its own contribution and help.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. Another question, how can work be done at the local level to find a win-win solutions with the industry? What kind of win-win solutions can be achieved? That's from Rochelle Roberts.
Well, that's a tricky one because if the industry is true to what they're saying, that they're happy if people switch to healthier beverages, then you could presumably work with the industry players and find educational campaigns or tax policy or school policies that would encourage people to switch to healthier things in the portfolio the companies have. I'm a little worried that that's possible just because I think they want to keep the sugar and caffeine high because, as I said, people overconsume them. But maybe I'll be proven wrong, and maybe the companies can be expected to behave in a trustworthy way. But we haven't seen too much evidence of that yet.
Yeah, this does seem like it's difficult to find the win-win solution. So I'm agreeing with you there. Well, I think we're running up to 1:57. Let me just ask one more question, and then we'll close it off. Oops, on my screen, just one blank. Hold one sec. There we go. This is from Alma Ochoa. Seeing that some of the organizations against taxation of sugar-sweetened beverages are Hispanic organizations, that is from the 2011 bill by Senator Lucio, should particular populations be prioritized in showing the harm from drinking SSBs?
Some of that has been done. Certainly there are studies out there that show different rates of consumption in different demographic groups. And I think some people are beginning to research to show differences in disease rates. But certainly in African Americans and particularly in Hispanic groups, the rates of obesity and diabetes are extremely high. So I do believe that your listener's comment is completely appropriate, that education about the disproportionate ravages of these on certain parts of the community would be very helpful.
Yeah, one thing I might mention is right here in the state of Texas, we've got the Sue Salud Center funded by the Robert Wood Johnson down in San Antonio, and I bet on their website, Salud America, that's the name, Salud America, I bet they have descriptions of how this very seriously negatively impacts Hispanic populations, and that is a trusted source of health information, I believe, Amelie Ramirez being the director down there. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I want to thank Kelly Brownell, Dr. Brownell, and Roberta Friedman for joining us today and sharing your opinions. We will keep you posted about what happens in Texas. I guess the next round will be the committee hearings, and there'll be more to share. We will try to get this information out to all of you who are interested in following our Texas legislative proceedings at the msdcenter.org website. You can see on the screen we also have a couple different Twitter feeds with the MSD Center, and I like to tweet these things out too. So if you're into Twitter, Facebook, blogging, or online, we will keep you up to date on how these bills weave their way through the Texas legislature. So thank you very much, Kelly and Roberta.
Great, thank you, Steve.